Well, I've seen it, the fruits of that work in other events, which are not as nearly as widespread as the pandemic. So, we've been building up to this. I mean, the issue is really simply this. In the last, 5 years or so, AT&T, as the contractor to build out this network, has done phenomenal work. They've really been at a very rapid pace building out cell sites and coverage. They promised us that they would, wherever they added coverage, they would add our dedicated spectrum of band 14, which is what I talked about earlier with our broadband spectrum, and they've done that. And so what's happening now is, I agree with you. I'm just extremely proud of the fact that we did something that has been of great significance. So what's happening, for instance, I get daily reports about what's going on with the use of this network as it relates to the pandemic. And I was just looking here, for instance, the most latest report that I got this morning was that the FirstNet Response Operations Group, which is the AT&T people that are responding to these things, has already supported 46 requests from public safety for network support related to the pandemic. And right now, they've got 22 deployable assets or other connectivity solutions actively supporting FirstNet subscribers. As an example, they moved the 2 Navy ships on the east and west coast, the one in New York City in the harbor and the one out in LA. And in both cases, FirstNet set up a deployable asset to support those facilities, to give the doctors and nurses, the Navy personnel, everybody the capability without any interruption, in other words, a good, solid, strong connection to support their activities. And from what I've heard, it's just been, wonderful. I mean, it just worked perfectly. Who would have ever dreamed that what we were talking about in 1995 today would be doing the kinds of things that this network is doing? And I just use those as an example. I mean, I have a whole list of where these deployable assets are located. And, when they set up these testing facilities, for instance, in some of the places around the country, they set up these testing facilities where nurses and other medical personnel are taking the samples and so on. And a lot of them didn't have the connectivity they needed. FirstNet was requested for help. They put a deployable right there at the site where these facilities are. Just things like that we never even anticipated or dreamed of would be. And the point is, these were done in a matter of, actually a few hours in most cases. We couldn't have done that. A few years ago, that would have been unheardable. I mean, people, they had deployable assets, all the major carriers, but not to the numbers that we have today, and certainly not dedicated for public safety.
So Chief,
and to your point, it's
go ahead, let me ask a follow-up on that, because I think you make a great point. And I know we all have our understanding of FirstNet as a network and what it means to the country and to public safety. But I've got two real questions. The first one's a little bit of a softball, I think, but it's really a critical softball, which is, we're talking about FirstNet and we're making the assumption that kind of everyone knows really what the benefits of FirstNet are. And the question I'd like you to answer, kind of in your own words and your own experience, and given you've lived through just about every technology cycle to hit public safety, certainly in the modern era, is why is FirstNet important? What differentiates it? What do folks need to know about why FirstNet's important? You touched on some of this with the deployables and some of the new capabilities, but can you go into a little bit, not just theoretically, but, what you're seeing, what you're hearing from your, former colleagues and from folks in the marketplace? Why is FirstNet important, and how is it different than what we have used from a communication standpoint previously?
Well, first of all, I'll use the main point is this is our network. It isn't AT&T's network. It isn't somebody else's. It belongs to public safety under the legislation, and it recognizes that public safety should be the main advisors to developing the network, maintaining the network. I can tell you that having worked with all the players, AT&T has been tremendously responsive to building this network. And I don't mean to be critical of AT&T, but I have to say that when they first started this effort, they had few people that understood or recognized what it was that FirstNet was going to try to accomplish. I mean, there were key people, I won't name them, that did understand it. I mean, there are people in AT&T that have worked with public safety for years that had a general understanding, but there are few of them in a huge corporation that really was focused on a network that served the public. And now they're talking about building within their scheme of things a very dedicated public safety network, which was different. I tell you, it was a challenge. And it still is a challenge, to be very honest with you. Every day, I talk with the people that do get it, understand it, and we're working with those people to educate them on how this is different. So I think that is the big issue to me, and the fact that this network has been built to different standards, to different requirements, to different deliverables than anything that currently or previously existed. In other words, other carriers can say, well, we do the same thing. They don't do the same thing. They do some of the same things. They try to serve their public safety customers. I don't like to get into a competitive discussion between the carriers, but I have to say, there's a big difference. And, of course, the downside of all this is that coverage is the key. And so what AT&T has been doing in direction of their contract is building out this coverage. I'll give you a good example. In my county in New York State, it's a primarily rural county. The city where I used to be the police chief is the only major municipality. And about a year and a half ago, I had a discussion with the AT&T people in the state capital, Albany, about their plans for building out Band 14 in the state, and in particular in my county, Tompkins County. And they explained to me that right then, a year and a half ago, they had 2 Band 14 cell sites on their map for building out in about a year and a half in my county, which I said, boy, that's not much. It's because it's a fairly large county. Well, as of about 2 months ago, we now have 6 Band 14 cell sites in my county, and a very large portion of the county is not only getting AT&T regular coverage, but getting Band 14 coverage, and it's working like gangbusters, far beyond what they had promised me. They've gone way beyond that, and I've been told, I talk to people all over the country, this is happening every place. I mean, not everybody has yet Band 14 coverage or good AT&T coverage. I recognize that, but that is changing pretty quick.
And I think it's fun to see that change you just described, right? I mean, it's one of the things that public safety asks for coverage in specific areas. This was done through the consultation process with the FirstNet Authority, and that input was taken. And what I've heard from a lot of chiefs and sheriffs and others that I've talked to is, FirstNet listened to what we asked for. B, they validated it. They put it down on maps. They shared it with all the bidders. And then the bidders came back and said how much they could do, obviously within the allotted capability of what they could afford to get done. And that was a competition, and we understand that. The net you're talking about, though, are a couple of things that I think are amazing byproducts of the process we went through and the teams that are executing on it. One is that the coverage that's being deployed has been deployed faster than promised in the process. And then second of all, they've gone above and beyond in a number of places to add more coverage where it was needed at the request of public safety. And to me, that's tremendous. That's exactly what we would want to see.
Yeah, although, let me play devil's advocate a little bit too, because Chief, I think you mentioned, there are areas where, the AT&T or FirstNet coverage, may not be built out yet to the standards that public safety, wants. So, what do we say to these folks, right? I mean, as they're making decisions about how they're going to leverage communications and purchase communications, and you also mentioned, and I won't put you on the spot too much, but because FirstNet is now rolled out, we have seen kind of the Me Too movement, right? Where now other carriers are offering very public safety specific types of offerings. And so what do you say to the user out there who's evaluating the different options? And there is, as we know, no network's ever going to have 100% geographic coverage. I think to TJ's point, when we were going through the RFP, we got great input and feedback as to really where communications were being used and where they were critical. And I think that was a really important roadmap, as FirstNet has gotten built out. But there's still holes. There's still, building going on. You've been around. You talk to people and you get it. So, what do we tell these folks in terms of, should they be considering other options? Is it coming? How quickly is it coming? And is it really making a difference?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't know exactly all of the scheduled implementations by AT&T. I mean, to some extent that's proprietary, but the point is I'm seeing the progress and I'm hearing about it all over the country. When people ask me about this, in response to your question, the obvious answer is if you don't have AT&T or FirstNet coverage, you shouldn't switch to AT&T or FirstNet until it is adequate for it to meet your needs. And I mean, there are places that yet don't have that coverage. There's no way I can advocate for somebody to go from something that works to something that doesn't work. So I have to tell them, be patient. And of course, my recommendation is that they be advocating to their state officials and to their local AT&T representatives to get the coverage they need so they can switch. And if they don't do that, I mean, it'll be slower. But I'm watching this. It's such a tremendous pace. I mean, a year ago, people that I was talking to that said they had no coverage have tremendous coverage today and are saying to me, we switched and we're so happy and we get the priority that we didn't get when major events happen. So, I mean, if you've got the coverage, it's a no-brainer to me that this is what you want to do. And I think it's important to understand that this is not about competition with other carriers. This is about public safety. We are public safety. We advocated for our own network. We got our own network. They're building our own network. And the point is, if you don't take advantage of it, I'm sorry. I mean, then shame on you. It isn't about whether or not you want to be a customer of another carrier. If you want to be a customer of another carrier, still have interoperability. You can still make phone calls between each other. You can exchange data between each other. You can do all kinds of things that you've always been able to do. It's not a big problem. What you don't get are all the features that are being built out that you guys had a lot to do with in the beginning that FirstNet is offering that these other carriers do not offer, nor will they ever offer. They just, it isn't practical for them to have the amount of dedicated applications and kinds of features and services that FirstNet can offer because we advocated for them.
No, well said, Harlan. And I think one of the things that Jason mentioned too, when I talk to folks in other countries that are looking at building out a FirstNet-like network, one of the unique side effects we had is I do believe that in building FirstNet and making it real and getting it deployed and getting over 1 million users on it and over 10,000 agencies on it already, is that all of the other carriers offered a public safety offering after that with some form of priority or other things. And so it raised the tide for the whole country, and it raised the capabilities of networks that serve public safety. And I think that was an amazing outcome. And I think that's good for first responders. And we probably couldn't have imagined that, 10 years ago, right?
Exactly.
No, that's right. And you mentioned coverage. I mean, and TJ and I have had the benefit of being able to, experience FirstNet ourselves and use it in different contexts. And, I can tell you from personal experience, it's not just about coverage, but things like the throughput and the bandwidth and the high speeds. We do comparisons all the time in different contexts. And it is pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing to see what the network can do and what they've done in such a short period of time. So I think, your insights there are tremendously useful, I think, for us and certainly for everybody watching.
Yeah, I think just to follow on that, the issue of throughput and so on is an issue that, you don't think much about all except when you're using it and you're seeing how it works.
Right.
But, the Police Executive Research Forum put out a report last year, which was an excellent report for a non-technical person that explained that, well, I use it this way. I say the number of bars you get on your phone, which we always think of as being the indication of how much, coverage or how much throughput you're getting, doesn't matter when you're talking about data and things like that. The FirstNet network, the way it's engineered, you can have 1 bar of coverage with that, whereas a competitor, another carrier, might have 5 bars. But in fact, when you test out the throughput of the 2 networks, the FirstNet network is faster than the 5-bar competitor, the carrier. And so those are kind of things that you and I, as not an engineer, appreciate because my department here is just in the process of switching over. They've got all the leadership have switched over, and already they're seeing the throughput difference. So
it's a great point. It's a great point. And you're right. That's one that, naturally you think, you look at your phone, I've only got a bar, so, we don't want to switch. We don't have great coverage. But, the reality is, the results come from the testing and that throughput has been tremendously improved, notwithstanding necessarily what the meter says on the phone screen. So that's a great point.